Mr. President. Well, for my group, this debate encapsulates everything that needs to change about the EU, because we reject the knee-jerk response of most of the people in this chamber that the solution to every problem that we have in member states is somehow more Europe. And so, increasingly, actually, does public opinion. President Barroso, you have argued, many other people in this chamber have argued, that the EU budget is there to promote economic growth. We've heard a lot of glib talk from all sides of this chamber that it's an investment budget. Well, if it was, perhaps on this side of the House we may support more bits of it, because nobody actually believes that it is an investment budget. If it's an investment budget, how come 40% of it is still spent on subsidies for farmers? And what about the 6% of the budget that is for administration costs? That isn't about investment for growth either. 8 member states, not just the UK, 8 member states wrote to you saying that the £2 billion cost of pensions for EU civil servants in the future was unaffordable, reform was required. You completely ignored that letter. Mr. Barroso, how can you insist, and how will the rest of you insist, that we need more spending, more money at an EU level? 5% of the existing budget, according to the Court of Auditors, is either spent illegally or irregularly, something like €5 billion. If that money was accounted for properly, if the Commission got its expenditure controls in place, then that would take up almost all of the increase that you were all asking for. And let's ask about some of the existing projects. Is that all money well spent? How has doubling the number of EU agencies in the last 8 years, how has that affected growth across Europe? And what about the new ECB building in Frankfurt? Several hundred million euros. How is that going to contribute to more growth in Greece? And what about our presence here in Strasbourg? 200 million a year that costs. How is that contributing to growth in member states? It isn't, of course. Nobody seriously believes that it is. Mr. Barroso, the EU is not short of money. It just spends the money that it has very, very badly. And let's be quite clear about this. To meet your demands for more spending, virtually every contributing member state is going to have to borrow that extra money. They're going to have to cut their public expenditure in order to send more money to the EU. It's completely unsustainable, it's unhelpful, and many member states will not stand for it. Can you seriously, in all good conscience, ask those member states to borrow that extra money, to make cuts at home, so that we can all spend more money here in Europe? It's time for the... Just a second, Mr Verhofstadt, we'll come to you in a second. It is time... It is time for the...
Herr Verhofstadt,
Calm down, Mr.
Herr Verhofstadt,
It's time
na,
for
Moment
the
mal, Herr
EU
Verhofstadt,
to spend the money
bitte.
that it already has better, so that it creates growth in national economies.
Ausnahmsweise.
Instead of demanding yet more money, why not take the time to go through the existing budget, line by line, asking yourself, does this item of expenditure really result in more economic growth in Europe? And it's not just Conservatives that are saying these things, Mr Swoboda. Even some of the Socialists, I'm pleased to say, are starting to see the light. The UK Socialists actually want a cut in the budget, not just a freeze, which is Mr Cameron's position. They voted in the House of Commons for a cut. And what about your great latter-day socialist hero, President Hollande? He fought an election, remember that? He fought an election on an end to austerity. What is he saying now? He said last week, we must be ready to do better by spending less. That is the great socialist hero that you tell us is setting an example for the rest of Europe to follow. And let me say a word, Mr President, about new member states. I think that enlargement has been one of the EU's greatest success stories, and I think we have to accept that it will cost more money to support those member states whose infrastructure was neglected under their communist past. That's why I believe that cohesion spending for new member states should be maintained, even within an overall freeze or a cut in the MFF. The way to do that is through budgetary reform, so that cohesion policy is limited to helping those countries that need it most. I think it is ridiculous that 40% of current structural and cohesion funding goes to the EU's richest countries. Countries like my own should be freed from to support our poor regions ourselves, without funnelling the money through the inefficient mechanism of the EU budget. I agree with the proposals actually put forward by our previous socialist government. that cohesion policy should be repatriated to the richer member states and that money only be used to fund the poorer member states who deserve that spending. Now, as everybody knows, I am actually a bit of an optimist. I believe that a better budget, not just a bigger budget, is still achievable in the summit this week. I hope that member states with good grace, goodwill, will sit down and agree that we need better EU spending and not just more EU spending. Thank you, Mr. President.